Located in Baalbek, the complex impresses with its gigantic blocks, such as the trilithon, formed by three stones weighing approximately 800 to 900 tons each, in addition to the enormous monolith in the quarry that exceeds 1,000 tons. At first glance, this seems to completely defy the logic of engineering, especially when compared to modern capabilities. Still, the most consistent explanation involves separating fact from interpretation. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. The Romans did indeed build the site's monumental temples, especially the Temple of Jupiter, using techniques that were extremely advanced for the time. However, there are indications that parts of the megalithic base may predate the Roman presence, possibly from earlier periods that were incorporated into later construction. This does not necessarily indicate a lost, technologically superior civilization, but rather different phases of occupation and construction over time. The transport and positioning of these stones, while impressive, are not impossible within the ancient context. The blocks were extracted very close to their intended location, eliminating the need for long journeys. Techniques such as earthen ramps, lever systems, rollers, and extensive manpower mobilization allowed for the gradual movement of extremely heavy loads. Nothing was done all at once, but rather in stages, with planning and time. Regarding the lack of detailed records, it's not as mysterious as it seems. The Romans used to document their own most visible and symbolic works, but they didn't always record the origin of pre-existing structures they reused. Incorporating old foundations into new projects was common, and not always considered noteworthy. Ultimately, Baalbek doesn't necessarily represent an impossible enigma or a lost technology, but rather an extreme example of what ancient civilizations were capable of achieving with organization, practical knowledge, and persistence. That's precisely what makes the place so impressive. Not something supernatural, but an extraordinary limit of human engineering before the modern era. We're not just talking about missing construction records. We're talking about the possibility that this site holds secrets about human capabilities that don't fit into our current understanding of the past. The megalithic stones of Baalbek in Lebanon have left experts, historians, and engineers completely perplexed. Roman architecture typically places the most impressive elements at the front. You enter and immediately see the largest, most striking stones, for obvious reasons. Here, they are at the back, completely on the opposite side from the entrance. These stones are so enormous that they defy everything we know about ancient construction. And it doesn't stop there. Not even modern construction techniques and sophisticated machinery can handle structures of this type. We're talking about pillars buried in the ground. It's 2024. Don't tell me we don't have the technological capacity to excavate rocks. Some say these structures indicate an extremely powerful civilization, while others believe they point to something beyond our physical world. Every aspect of the construction, from the size of the blocks to the perfect fit, represents an extraordinary level of engineering, the kind we may never see again anywhere else in the world. These are no ordinary blocks. The trilithon, as they are called, consists of three enormous limestone blocks, each about 19 meters long, 4.3 meters high, and 6 meters wide. Each weighs around 800 tons. But as impressive as that is, it's not the most unbelievable part. These giant stones aren't simply resting on the ground. They're suspended about 7 meters high, perfectly fitted together, with no room for even a speck of dust. Now think about that for a second. How do you even begin to move something that weighs the equivalent of several commercial airplanes, let alone lift and position it with surgical precision? And remember, this was done thousands of years before cranes, hydraulic systems, or modern machinery existed. But this is where things get even more interesting. About 800 meters from the main temple, there is a quarry that holds even greater secrets. It appears to be the original location of the stones, with evidence suggesting they are not the only ones. There, abandoned for centuries, are three unfinished blocks that make the trilithon seem small in comparison. The first is known as the Pregnant Woman's Stone. It weighs almost 1,000 tons. Then there's the Southern Stone, discovered in the 1990s, with an impressive about 100 tons. And if that's not enough, archaeologists found an even larger one in 2014, the Forgotten Stone, weighing around 1,500 tons. The local legends surrounding these stones are also fascinating. One story tells of a pregnant woman who convinced people to feed her by claiming she knew the secret to moving these giant blocks, hence the name Pregnant Woman's Stone. Another speaks of supernatural beings, like genies, who were supposedly responsible for cutting and transporting the stones. Some locals even believe that touching the pregnant woman's stone can increase fertility. These stories may seem fantastical, but they reveal something important. These monuments have intrigued people for generations, each trying to explain the seemingly impossible. Even modern engineers are baffled. One study suggested that it would take more than 500 people working with sophisticated machinery to move a 557-ton block across flat terrain. But moving it uphill and then lifting it 7 meters high? Engineers estimate that it would require 40,000 workers. That's more people than the population of many small towns. The big question is simple. Why use such absurdly large stones when smaller blocks would solve the same problem? In Baalbek, this choice is not only impressive, it completely changes how we understand ancient engineering. One of the most widely accepted explanations is not linked to structural necessity, but to the demonstration of power. Ancient civilizations frequently built on a monumental scale to impress, intimidate, and immortalize their presence. The larger and more impossible the structure seemed, the greater the message conveyed. In this sense, megaliths were not merely functional, they were symbolic. Over time, this extreme scale opened the door to increasingly daring theories. Ancient legends attributed the construction to mythical figures, such as giants or biblical characters. In the modern era, hypotheses such as that of ancient astronauts have emerged, championed by authors like Graham Hancock and Zechariah Sitchin, suggesting the involvement of advanced civilizations or even extraterrestrial beings. The problem is that these ideas lack concrete evidence. They arise mainly because what we see seems to go beyond what we expect from older technologies. From a scientific standpoint, the explanation is less spectacular, but still impressive. Archaeologists show that the Romans and possibly earlier peoples mastered advanced engineering techniques, including lever systems, pulleys, ramps, and massive organization of labor. Tool marks on the stones clearly confirm human work. Modern experiments have demonstrated that, with time, planning, and collective effort, it is possible to move extremely heavy blocks. Still, there's an important point. While these techniques explain a good part of the construction, they don't fully answer why such great extremes were reached, especially in the largest blocks. That's where the mystery remains partially open, not as something supernatural, but as an extreme limit of ancient engineering that we are still trying to fully understand. Ultimately, Baalbek is not proof of impossible technology, but of something perhaps more fascinating. How far ancient civilizations were willing to go to build something that would survive the test of time, even if it meant exceeding all known practical limits. So why do these extraordinary theories persist? Perhaps because common explanations don't spark our imagination in the same way that extraordinary ones do. The philosopher Daniel Dennett once suggested that when people can't imagine what is truly possible, they tend to resort to supernatural explanations. Baalbek continues to fascinate us precisely because it lies on that fine line between documented fact and intriguing legend. There are no detailed ancient records explaining exactly who ordered its construction or how the work was organized. This silence creates a kind of perfect blank canvas where people project their own theories and stories. Some see this as evidence of lost civilizations with advanced technology. Others see it as proof of extraterrestrial contact. Scientists, on the other hand, see it as a testament to human engineering capabilities that we are still trying to fully understand. And perhaps that is the true magic of Baalbek. It's not just about giant stones or ancient construction techniques. It's about how a single archaeological site can simultaneously challenge our understanding of the past and inspire the boldest theories about what might have been possible. The truth is, whether built by ingenious humans or mysterious forces, Baalbek remains one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history. And that, however you look at it, is simply incredible. Modern investigations and discoveries. When archaeologists finally got permission to excavate deep in Baalbek, what they found changed everything. Fragments of pottery with cuneiform writing proved that people were already there thousands of years before the Romans. Architectural plans carved directly into the temple floors. And, perhaps most surprisingly of all, construction techniques that correspond with impressive precision to buildings in Jerusalem. While everyone was debating how the stones were moved, more than a century of serious scientific investigation had been quietly revealing the true secrets of Baalbek. And what the researchers discovered is absolutely fascinating. The modern scientific history begins in 1898, when Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany visited the site. His visit initiated the first major archaeological excavations, which continued until 1904. What began as imperial curiosity transformed into a revolutionary research project that began to rewrite the entire history of Baalbek. Each layer revealed raised more questions than answers. The most shocking discovery came when researchers cleaned the Temple of Jupiter and found evidence that human occupation in Baalbek dates back to the Neolithic period. We're talking about people living in that location possibly 10,000 years ago, long before anyone imagined that this place had any importance. If people lived in Baalbek 10,000 years ago, this suggests that the site's importance extends far beyond Roman colonization, and that the enormous foundation stones, the trilithon, and other megaliths were already there before the arrival of the Romans. This would explain the complete Roman silence. Ultimately, one cannot expect the Romans to document something they themselves did not know how it had been done. Meanwhile, the hypothesis remains that an ancient settlement capable of such sophisticated engineering existed. Discovering that the structure predates the Roman period does not solve the engineering enigma. This line of reasoning reinforces the idea that Baalbek may have gone through several phases of occupation and use over thousands of years, but it does not necessarily point to a lost civilization with unknown technology. The discoveries made by the collaboration between the Lebanese University and the German Archaeological Institute, especially the fragments of Persian pottery with cuneiform inscriptions, clearly show that peoples of the Persian Empire were in the region between the 6th and 4th centuries BC. This is important because it helps fill historical gaps and confirms that the site was not occupied solely by the Romans. However, presence does not imply authorship. The fact that the Persians were there does not prove that they were responsible for the megaliths. On the contrary, when we compare their known constructions, such as in Persepolis, we see a completely different approach. Much smaller blocks, generally between 1 and 20 tons, and techniques that do not come close to the extreme scale of Baalbek. Furthermore, there are no Persian records attributing the construction of these structures to themselves, which, while not definitive, weighs against this hypothesis. And there is a crucial point. If the Persians had mastered techniques for moving blocks, weighing hundreds or thousands of tons, We would expect to see this pattern repeated in other locations, something that simply does not happen. What this evidence actually suggests is something more plausible. Baalbek was occupied and reused by different civilizations over time. The Persians were there, the Romans built upon the site, and possibly other earlier cultures also contributed to the megalithic foundation. This keeps the mystery alive, but within a more realistic scenario. Instead of an unknown civilization with advanced technology, what we see is an accumulation of knowledge, techniques, and efforts over generations, with some methods that we don't yet fully understand, but which don't necessarily require extraordinary explanations. But the engineering challenge of megaliths seems to exceed the capabilities they have demonstrated. And that wasn't even the biggest surprise. German researcher Margarete van Es made another crucial discovery while studying how these giant stones were cut. She found that the ancient builders were extremely clever. They cut the megaliths along natural fissures between the rock layers. This technique made it much easier to remove enormous blocks without cracking or breaking them. Interestingly, this same method appears in other Roman projects, such as the famous Pontus Aqueduct, du Gard, in France. In other words, we know that the Romans possessed this technique in their engineering repertoire. The more we learn about Baalbek through scientific investigation, the more questions arise. Each discovery not only adds to our knowledge, it completely transforms what we thought we knew about this incredible place. Now, let's talk about something most people have never heard of: Roman architectural plans carved directly into the site itself. We're not talking about papyrus drawings that have been lost over time. We're talking about designs literally engraved into the stone floor. German excavations between 1900 and 1904 were the first to document these impressive discoveries. The most striking piece was a detailed design carved directly into the floor of the large courtyard. It wasn't a simple sketch. It was an accurate plan of part of the hexagonal courtyard, drawn at an impressive scale of approximately 1 to 12.6. Think about what that means. These weren't just skilled workers stacking stones. They were highly qualified planners who carefully calculated every angle, every measurement, and every element of the design before positioning a single block. Were these engravings practical guides for the workers? Or could they also be a way of demonstrating the architect's pride and extraordinary skill? However, the most surprising connection emerged when researchers took a closer look at Podium Bornfried, the foundation that supports the 6 enormous columns that still dominate the landscape today. When they analyzed the construction techniques, they found something absolutely surprising. The style and methods used in Podium I were virtually identical to the Herodian architecture found in Jerusalem. They were extremely precise matches. Both sites used exactly the same pattern of alternating blocks, known as headers and stretchers. Both featured the same type of finish with carved edges on the stones. Even the average height of the layers was exactly the same, about 1.1 meters. This is too specific to be a coincidence. It suggests that there may have been direct involvement of Herodian builders in Baalbek, or at least shared building traditions connecting these sites across the ancient world. Thus, step by step, from Kaiser Wilhelm's initial visit to these modern discoveries, our understanding of Baalbek has become incredibly rich and complex. What began as a site famous only for its giant stones has transformed into a veritable history book, encompassing the Neolithic period, Persian civilization, Roman engineering, and Herodian construction techniques. Each new discovery raises new questions. Who really built this place? Why did they use these specific techniques? And how much still remains buried beneath centuries of earth, waiting to be revealed? Now that you understand the apparent engineering impossibility, here's what makes it all the more mysterious. This site was continuously occupied for about 11,000 years. Each civilization that encountered it treated it as sacred, but none claimed to have built those enormous foundation stones. Let's journey through the ages to understand how each civilization used this structure. Baalbek gained worldwide recognition in 1984 when UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site, but its importance is much older. The site has over 11,000 years of continuous human occupation, with evidence dating back to around 9,000 BC, long before the great classical civilizations even existed. Excavations have revealed successive layers of occupation, including pottery from the Chalcolithic period, Bronze Age artifacts, and structures that show how different cultures reused and rebuilt the same space over time. From the earliest inhabitants, who chose the hilltop, to the Romans who erected their temples there is a clear pattern. That spot has always been considered special. The name Baalbek itself likely derives from Baalnebk, something like Lord of the Spring, in reference to a nearby spring that would have made the location sacred and strategic. Around 3200 BC, the Phoenicians transformed the region into an important religious center, dedicating temples to deities such as Baal and Astarte. Traces of these constructions can still be found beneath later structures. It was during this period that some of the most intriguing hypotheses emerged. Many researchers believe that megaliths, such as the Trilithon, may have origins predating the Romans, possibly associated with Phoenician, or even earlier periods. If this is true, we would be facing an engineering feat thousands of years old, involving the transport and positioning of blocks weighing hundreds of tons. However, this hypothesis is not universally accepted. What is known for certain is that Baalbek was continuously occupied, modified, and expanded by different civilizations. When Alexander the Great conquered the region in 334 BC, he integrated it into the Hellenistic world and renamed it Heliopolis. Later, under Roman rule, the site reached its monumental peak with the construction of the temples that now dominate the landscape. Ultimately, Baalbek is not the work of a single civilization, but the result of layers of history accumulated over millennia. A place where different peoples recognized the same value and decided to build, each in their own way, upon what already existed before them. First came Pompey the Great in 64 BC. Then Julius Caesar made it an official Roman colony in 47 BC. But it was Emperor Augustus, around 16 BC, who truly initiated the most ambitious building project in the ancient world. Interestingly, the Romans didn't simply destroy everything and start from scratch. Instead, they merged their god Jupiter with the local deity Baal, creating this powerful hybrid entity called Jupiter Baal. It was like a form of cultural diplomacy through architecture. The timeline of the construction is impressive. Emperor Nero continued the construction of the enormous Temple of Jupiter. Emperor Antoninus Pius added the Temple of Bacchus. Finally, the Severan dynasty completed the entire complex, with the Temple of Venus in the 3rd century. At its peak, the site featured gigantic columns rising to the sky, marble surfaces gleaming in the sun, and thousands of pilgrims filling the courtyards. Anyone there would feel as if they were at the center of the divine universe. But then, Christianity changed everything. When Emperor Constantine converted in the early 4th century AD, construction was halted. Emperor Theodosius went even further. He destroyed pagan statues, demolished altars, and transformed sacred spaces into Christian churches. The Temple of Venus became a chapel. The hexagonal courtyard was converted into a church. Emperor Justinian ordered 8 giant columns from the Temple of Jupiter to be brought to Constantinople to decorate the Hagia Sophia. These stones were so impressive that the emperor wanted to use them in one of the largest churches ever built. In 637 AD, Muslim armies conquered Baalbek, and the site underwent yet another transformation. This time, the temples were converted into a fortress, also known as Kala. That's why the locals still call the place Kalat. Baalbek to this day. Over the centuries, various dynasties left their mark: Umayyads, Abbasids, Fatimids, and Ayyubids, each modifying walls, adding towers, and building new structures upon ancient foundations. What we have today is essentially a layered historical cake. Every civilization that passed through this place left something behind. But there's a question that continues to intrigue researchers. Who were the first people to erect those absurdly heavy foundation stones? Who made the original decision to transform this hill into a stage for gods, emperors, and conquerors for thousands of years? Every great mystery deserves a thorough investigation. And the big question everyone wants answered is simple. How did ancient peoples move stones weighing over 1,000 tons? The theories proposed by the researchers are impressive, some as intriguing as the mystery itself. Let's start with the most obvious hypothesis: wooden rollers and ramps. At first glance, it seems logical. You place these giant stones on cylindrical wooden logs, reduce friction, and simply push or pull them across the ground. Basic physics, right? But when archaeologists tested this theory in practice, it was a complete disaster. Richard Atkinson, a respected archaeologist, attempted to move a replica of a bluestone from Stonehenge, a tiny stone compared to the giants of Baalbek. The moment they started pulling it uphill, everything began to slide uncontrollably sideways. In another experiment, researchers were transporting a replica statue when it lost its balance, fell off the rollers, and shattered. Now imagine accomplishing this feat with blocks hundreds of times heavier, traversing approximately 1.5 kilometers of uneven terrain. Faced with this, many began to place their bets on the ingenuity of Roman engineering. And in fact, the Romans were extraordinary. They developed systems such as the tripastos, the pentaspastos, and the polypastos, as well as lifting towers operated by large teams of humans and animals. For a long time, we underestimated ancient builders, but that has changed. Evidence shows that they were organized, had practical knowledge, and the ability to execute impressive projects. Depictions from ancient Egypt, for example, show hundreds of coordinated workers moving colossal structures with precision. Even so, Baalbek is on another level. It's not just about something bigger. It's a different category of challenge. While known Roman cranes handled a few tons, the blocks there weigh 800 or even 1,000 tons. The difference isn't incremental, it's exponential. Therefore, no single explanation completely solves the problem. Some hypotheses suggest the use of techniques now lost, engineering methods that were never recorded. Others propose that some of the stones may have been worked almost on-site, reducing the need for transportation. Still, these ideas do not fully explain the observed precision and scale, and that's precisely where the fascination lies. Baalbek is not just an ancient work. It's an extreme limit of human engineering that we still haven't been able to fully reconstruct. The more we study it, the more we realize that our ancestors were capable of feats far beyond what we usually imagine. And perhaps that's the most impressive part of all. It's not that it's impossible. It's that we still don't fully understand how it was done. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, now's the time to leave a like. And if you enjoy in-depth content like this, we still have many other ancient mysteries to explore with you. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.